first thought was that they could not have chosen a more technologically challenged person to moderate a session like this. I have to confess that at a time when the e-book reader is virtually obsolete, I have yet to buy my first one. And in fact, when I first read the mail about rethinking translations, I did think that they were referring to the good old-fashioned way of translating a text from Hindi into English or vice versa, or into other languages. And it was only when I read the fine print that I realized that they were talking about what we are going to be talking about, is translating the printed word into a variety of multimedia, including the e-book, the audiobooks, graphic text, film, and so on. And that really made me think what a 90-degree turn publishing has taken in a very short span of time. Because just a few years back in Jaipur, if we were talking about translations, we would actually be talking about the translations in the traditional sense, the problems of getting regional languages into English and more widely read, the problems of the Bhasha writers as compared to writers in English, and so on and so forth, instead of the question of translating the printed word into mechanical forms. And the other big sea change has been the whole attitude of publishers towards ebooks. Again, just a few short years back, publishers viewed the ebook with a great deal of trepidation and suspicion. I mean, there were all kinds of issues, copyright issues. There was this big fear as to what ebooks, the impact that ebooks would have on traditional booksellers and traditional forms of selling the book. And from that, we have reached a stage today where ebooks are part and parcel of every publishing contract. Every publisher wants to have ebook rights along with the print rights. And not only do we want the ebook rights, but the ebook is by and large brought out simultaneously with the printed book. There is no longer that gap of 6 to 9 months, which I think we used to keep earlier. Now it's simultaneous. And in fact, there are even publishers like Advance Editions in the UK, where they publish the ebook ahead of the print book and then invite readers' comments, which the author is free to take on board or not. And so when the printed book comes out a few months later, it is presumably an improved version of the ebook, because the author has already had feedback from readers. And it's a good example of the ebook leading the printed book. And as I said, you know, ebooks are in a way the innocence in the piece, and the ebook reader is really on its way out. I mean, you can now download the novel you want to read on your smartphone. You can download it on a mind-boggling number of sites on your laptop or your iPad. You can even read it in the form of SMSs, which seems to be a form ideally suited to short fiction and poetry. And of course, there is a growing number of novels and books now which are being turned into films. Now, while all this is a cause for celebration, if it does help books and authors to reach a much wider audience than ever before, to reach, for a book to reach a reader in small towns or in places where there may not even be a bookstore where they can actually go and buy the book, or for people who can only read a book on the run, you know, on their iPads or smartphones at airports or while traveling, then of course that's great, because you know what all of us as publishers and writers would want is that your work reaches as wide a number of people as possible. But the concerns and the worries have not really gone away completely, and we should not lose sight of them. Copyright issues still remain, and there also remains the very real fear of what effect all of this is going to have on the bricks and mortar stores. The closure of a large number of bookstores, most dramatically in the US, but in other countries as well, is a reality. But at the end of it, there remains a question. In taking the printed word and translating it into a mechanical or electronic form, how much is lost in translation? Are we still able to keep the essence of the book, not just in terms of being true to its meaning, but to borrow what my predecessor in this session today, Suresh Rao, said, the bookness of the book. Are we still able to keep that when the book that you're reading is not a hardback or a paperback which you hold in your hands, but a text that you scroll up and down on your iPad or your mobile? Now, to discuss this question, we have a number of people here, and I'd like to start with you, Mansi, because when we were discussing this earlier, you raised a rather interesting question of the problem of discoverability, which leads to the problem of choice. And could you expand a little on what you meant by that?
Thank you, Renuka. So, yeah, as Renuka was saying, we were talking about this earlier, and for me, the thing that bothers me a lot is the problem of discoverability. So to start with, I'm a data geek. I love looking at data and trying to figure out how something leads to something else and mapping patterns and that sort of thing. And I remember reading somewhere that how consumption of book, which is buying of a book and reading of a book, happens is it begins with awareness, which could lead to interest, which could lead to desire, which could lead to action, which is the act of buying and reading the book. And for me, if it begins with awareness and then kind of goes in a pyramid, only a small percentage of people who are aware of a book become converted into readers. But awareness itself is becoming more and more problematic in this world of e-reading and the internet, and the internet is such a diverse and democratic space that anything can be uploaded onto the internet, anything can be discovered on the internet, and which of course leads to the problem of choice. So if there's so much data that's available on the internet, and even off the internet for that matter, how does a reader decide this is the book that I'm interested in, which then leads to desire and then to action? So the problem of discoverability, which I think needs to be converted into the act of discovery, is maybe the most interesting thing that we're trying to sort of figure out in this world today. It's a bit, for me, like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Now, what has happened in journalism is that because of the shrinking newsroom, there's so much information available that very often you'll find false information available on the internet. And in the world of social media, of course, you realize after a while that there is something that has gone viral. Somebody has shared this link which somebody else has shared, and it's gone everywhere. And then at some point you realize that it's not really true. There was this brilliant piece recently about this rumor that started to be spread about, I think somebody had written online about a meeting that Charles Dickens had with Walt Whitman, and this is a meeting that never happened. But there was this article that was written about it, and then people thought, oh, how wonderful, this is exciting, let me share this. And this went on and on and on until some academic said, you know, they never met. This is not possible, this did not happen. And so the problem of too much information and the problem of being able to provide information with the click of a button is that credibility suffers. And for us as publishers, what is the thing that makes us able to be taken seriously, that makes us, once we are discovered, to convert that active discovery into action? I think it's kind of one of those things where we go back to good old-fashioned practices, which I know will make Renuka very happy, which is that it's good old-fashioned curatorship. If everybody is saying something to you, whose voice do you trust the most? It is the voice of someone that you've known as a credible source for the longest period of time. For example, right now, if I want to go and buy a book, I can search on Amazon or Flipkart or Goodreads and find millions of books to choose from. But if I really want a book to read, I will ask someone I trust. I will maybe call Renuka up and say, suggest a book for me to read today. And we're kind of returning to good old-fashioned practices of listening to the people that we trust, believing the sources that we find credible, and sometimes even just saying, this person has liked the books that I have liked, and so maybe this person can recommend books for me to like in the future. So we're kind of repositioning ourselves as publishers, as curators of great literature rather than disseminators of literature, and that's how I think is the path for discoverability, which is that in order to be discovered, you need to constantly position yourself, whether it's in the form of metadata, which is a technical way of doing it, or whether it's in the form of really solid editing to start with, that you position yourself in such a place where from the moment you're discovered, you are seen as a trustworthy source.
Thank you, Mansi. And now I'd like to invite Mahua to talk about the importance of multimedia interpretation in our rather multilingual, multicultural Indian society.
Can you hear me? Now, good afternoon. Now, a question I often quiz myself with is, as a translator of the written or the spoken word and its transformation into another language or, a visual interpretation, is, the importance of translating it. Why are we translating material? Why are we translating stuff? And in the context of India, and what is the need of translating? And how much maybe I personally as a translator or an editor dealing with translations, how much am I being able to translate of the original material into something trustworthy? So that's the question I am often faced with. And why do we keep, molding and remolding stuff, across, make them into films or, transform them into ebooks? What is the need? Now, I think in a country as, multilingual and multicultural, with a very plural society, I have worked with is of importance. So maybe, I would like to say that, in such spaces, maybe a multimedia expression is often required when, suppose you are dealing with a film, a documentary film, which is an educational promotional film or, it's teaching people something in the rural areas of India. There you are dealing with, translating stuff for them, either from the original language and then into English and then back into, it's like a transformation of the bhasha into English and then back to the regional language, maybe subtitling, captioning, whatever. So it's quite a job, it's quite a tough thing where you have to actually translate, as I said, the cultural identity of, the sphere, the space that you are required to, translate and express. Now, I would just like to refer to The Politics of Translation by Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak, who says that, the crucial role performed by translation in the definition of the boundaries of the other and one's own identity as articulated in language. That is what I am harping on, transforming the cultural identity. And it kind of redefines the identity of the language through cross-media borders. So when the regional language of, the original piece is unknown to, the user of maybe a film, then it's the, it's, 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 it's it's the responsibility of the translator to transform it so that, you know, there is a love and a relationship, I mean, nurturing that love and relationship with the language. So I often feel that maybe, you know, we have to sometimes, unless it's a very, very literary subject, we have to transcend, you know, the space of English as a language. I mean, transcend the Englishness of the language, or whatever, the Bengali-ness or the Hindi-ness of the language, and resort to a cross-media, you know, where you are using a lot of other supports to translate your thoughts. But as I said, that, well, I would like to put it as, you know, which are not so literary, non-literary stuff in the context of India. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahua. And I'd now like to ask the bookseller in our midst, Rick, to speak. I know, Rick, you said that you would not really like to dwell on the Amazon experience, but you can't ignore it either, and you can tell us from the US perspective what that.
Thank you. I take it I am the only bookseller in our midst. Is anyone else actively a bookseller here? Okay. Oh, there is. Oh, good. Yay. Yes. Good. Because as conversation in, I would say in the States, though there are certainly publisher-only gatherings, but there is a sense that many parties have a stake in this. Most parties have a sense there is a stake by all concerned in this, and so there would be more of a kind of a bookseller publisher joint way at doing this. When we did a little exchange of things beforehand, which I think included India, Australia, North Carolina, and Seattle, as sort of going around about things, there was a thing that a thread that Mansi first talked about here about discoverability, which is very much what we as a physical bookshop are. And I'm from a single bookstore in Seattle, which is, as Renuka says, where Amazon is. We watch them come along. They used to meet in our cafe when they were at the very beginning. They had their space wasn't proper for meetings. But we have this role of, that's very much how people find books, that is certainly recognized more and more, or it's become recognized again by the publishers large and small. The smaller publishers have never lost sight of the role of the physical bookshop. This is not just this is acknowledging that not all the books that people see in our store are bought in our store. That finding and knowing about books, even if they're going to be bought electronically, have often people see them. It's a matter of all the various reminders and kind of note things of what books are out there, and as we really do try and decide which books are to be read. We, for all our dealing with the physical object of the book, certainly are in the midst of all the changing other contexts. We pretty much most publishers now don't have physical catalogs. We work electronically with those. With the lists of the publishers are doing, we as we have even more drastically shrunk newsrooms and media outlets that are print media, newspapers and such. We work with the various social media platforms, both ourselves as a store, but also authors and publishers. So there's all sorts of navigating going on, but I think the thing most common is that no one really can do this on their own, that publishers can't do it on their own, booksellers can't do it on their own, authors can't do it on their own. There needs to be this sort of communication and joint working together in a way that hasn't always been the case. And I sense from my years of coming here that there's been a little less of that communication amongst each other here in India. Certainly among booksellers, I've sensed less of that. In the US, we have a lot of, for all our sense of competing with each other, we often are working jointly in certain larger issues. Again, though, to come around to the way books, which are at the heart of this discussion, that's such a thing where we help talk about books, and people come to us in the bookshops, and I'm sure that's true of bookstores here, but in the States, to also say, independent bookshops are actually on the resurgence. There is, after all that they had to endure with the chains and then the initial beginning of Amazon, they actually are currently enjoying a revival. A generation of shops that have been around 40 or 50 years are getting new owners and kind of succeeding, moving to a next generation, and new ones are being started. So it's not enough yet for the publishers, the level of business they had with the loss of the chains and with the pressure on their margins that come from Amazon. So the publishers are actually dealing with more turbulence probably right now than on the book selling side. That's enough. Yeah.
Thanks, Rick. And now it's over to you, Shona. Shona wants to talk about books as part of the entertainment space, which includes how somebody is buying a book is likely to trust a stranger on Amazon or Goodreads more than a traditional reviewer. An interesting.
Thank you. I think we can all see now the shape of the future in terms of e-books and print books and the balance, that really e-books have become a format of choice, rather like deciding to have takeaway food as opposed to cooking at home or eating in a restaurant. And I think that gives us a lot of certainty as publishers and as a positive thing. I'm sure we're all pleased that the print book, rumoured to demise about the time of the silent movie has, fought off another threat. But I think that we've perhaps taken our mind off what is really a bigger challenge to us as publishers, is that we are actually competing for consumers' time, for readers' time, in really what is now a big, broad entertainment space. And probably I think all of us should just pause to a moment and think what time we spend that we used to read on doing things like checking Facebook, looking at Twitter, reading what the New York Times has said about something, and really just communing with our friends and looking at pictures of cute babies, cute cats, whatever. All that time is the time that we used to spend reading. Readers are not taking time out of the time where they need to feed their children or pick up their children from school or ring their mothers or any of these concerns. And I think that offers us real challenges as publishers. On the most basic level, if you used to spend an hour a day reading and now you spend an hour a day on other pursuits, that really has a financial effect on the numbers of books that people read. People are not liking reading less, but they are actually spending less time doing it. I think this is also exhibited in the time that people are really, I suppose, focusing on things which relate to other entertainment forms. The rise of the film tie-in is incredibly significant. All around the world we've seen films like Gone Girl, and at the moment HarperCollins is selling the books for the Clint Eastwood movie American Sniper, but also Angelina Jolie's Unbroken. The sales of these books are really extraordinary because people are choosing to come back to the books that they've never read after they've seen the movie. Now, there's a good argument to saying you should read Gone Girl before you see the movie, but it's a symbol of, I think, the joining up of all these different aspects. Another fine example is, in fact, George R.R. Martyn, whose books HarperCollins publishes in the Commonwealth. I'm afraid to say that Australia beats India for illegal downloads of the Game of Thrones series, but in actual fact what we've seen as a result of that is that George R.R. Martyn's sales, which have always been strong and his new books widely anticipated, have sold in phenomenal numbers. And all of these things have spin-offs. People reading George R.R. Martyn books, good, but we've seen subsequently a collapse in sales of other fantasy novels, because if you start at the beginning of the Game of Thrones series, you're going to be reading them for a very long time. The effect that people spending time on Facebook reading about other people's lives, I personally believe has had an effect on the women's memoir category, because if you're looking at the lives of other women who you know even vicariously, you're probably not sitting down reading the story that used to be a big category in Australia of women running away and having a wonderful time in France and meeting a handsome Frenchman and restoring a chic little villa. These are all things that as publishers we need to step back and think, how can we channel our publications appropriately to get to the book, to to get to the bookshops, for the sellers to be really well equipped, and to get them to the readers. There are very many people in the chain, from the actual creator, the author, to the reader, and possibly there are even too many of us, and I think that that's the biggest challenge that we have in translating our books into the modern medium.
Thanks, Shona. You made some very interesting points. And now quickly over to Satti, who wants to talk about the aesthetics of each medium into which books are now being translated.
We need that mic. You can hear me without the mic, right? So this is a voice from the wilderness. I'm talking as a translator who discovered, through stumbling idiotically through literal and explicated renderings of originals, that what I was trying to translate was the range of possibilities stirred by the original work, that I was never translating content, and that in general I was reducing that experience of being on the brim of something. So for me, the principle of translation I've come to in my own practice is, if I was praying to the goddess Saraswati, I would say, please, may I not reduce the count of possibilities in my text from what the original offers to a reader. Yesterday we had Vinod Kumar Shukla, the poet whose fiction I've translated, talking at the Literature Festival, and he says that when he starts to write, he doesn't know where he's going. He finds something which is drawing him, and then at the end of this bit by bit process, he has encountered, expressed, come near what he calls the swaroop, the form of the thing he was hoping to say. So this is from the wilderness, because I'm saying my sense of translation in any medium is making this available. So making the kind of experience available which is open form in this way. Now, this is not something that publishers need to hear immediately, but let's say you are commissioning work. So let's say if we think of audiobooks, it's easy to imagine that we would want the kind of readers that would suggest things by change of rhythm and tone of voice and drawl and accents. But with graphic novels and with movies, again, what we are doing is the kind of economy, the kind of hinting, the kind of juxtapositions, the kinds of gaps which make the roller coaster ride similar. That's the end of the voice from the wilderness. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as I believe we're running out of time, I'd like to throw the floor open right away to our audience for any questions. Please do name the person whom you'd like to answer your question. Any questions? Well, then I'd like to kick it off with a question rising out of what Shona said, that would you then agree that the actual threat to the physical book is not just the e-book, but all the other various forms of multimedia that we have, which are not necessarily books, but as you said, Facebook, Twitter, everything else which takes up so much of our time and attention, and TV, not to forget.
Definitely, and I think that someone touched on it earlier. I think the importance of, I think it was you, Ray, authors, booksellers, publishers working together has never been more important. This is not the time for, I suppose, an author to just automatically assume that publishers will do the requisite publicity. The strongest impact I think we all get is when everybody works as a team, and I think that this is also true in terms of international publishers. Sometimes when we've bought bought rights for books to publish them, say, in Australia and I'm sure India. We've done our own thing, but the importance now of sharing the successes with publishers around the world and picking up and, you know, finding those wonderful threads has been incredibly effective. I mean, I really do mean that that the significance of the traditional news media, apart from a few very key reviewers, has diminished. Fewer people are reading newspapers, but the reliance on people from Goodreads or from Amazon, I think, is very significant, and that as publishers, I think it's crucial that we monitor reviews and look at what we can do and what word we can get out there, and work with our authors to explain that, you know, even if this isn't their natural milieu, there's probably one of the forms of social media that they feel comfortable with, even if it's only Instagram.
Would any of you like to add any more comments?
I would just like to add to what Shona said, that, you know, I often feel that even a WhatsApp conversation, you know, between two people, they sometimes, you know, they have a certain dramatic element to it, and it's like a novel. I mean, even a WhatsApp conversation can turn into a bit of a novel. So, of course, it's a threat, but then we can also make good use of it, as I said. Translation. Thank you.
Well, I think that's one, there is a question there, but I just like to add that that's one reason why publishers are thinking now of SMS novels.
Okay. I'd like to pick up on the voice from the wilderness, just so you don't feel lonely. That's, I mean, it seems to me a crucial feature of translation is resonance, the quality of resonance, and this is true of translation not just from one language to another, but from one medium to another, because, as Shona pointed out, a film version of a book contains the resonances which are brought to the film by the book, or to the book by the film. And yet it seems to me that so much publishing these days on an international level is dampening down resonance. It's just interested in story, basically, which is the least resonant of films. And so I just wondered if you could pick up on your point about, you actually did raise this point about possibilities and implications and so on.
Yeah, but as soon as we use the word content, there is, as soon as there is the feeling that there's something which can be exported, you know, not evoked and conveyed vaguely. People say, well, you could take this and just put it there. It is reconfiguring it, but so that the roller coaster ride has bumps and surprises. For instance, the condition of illustration of books is wretched in India, and it is wretched in general because of the view that illustrations softly extend the world of the writing. But good illustration is like good sound in film. It's a challenge, and there's tension, and it is another kind of imagination. All I'm doing is, you know, footnoting this idea of creating the same kinds of gaps and breaks, and which means assigning the work not to, you know, a hack, but somebody imaginative. So if you want, you know, if you want a graphic novel, then find somebody who can make the jumps right. And similarly for, you know, reading, and of course, SMSs are brilliant for encouraging, you know, Zen thought. So.
Any more questions? In that case, and I think we've also run out of our time, so I'd just like to thank all my panelists, Mansi, Mahua, Rick, Shona, and Satti. Thank you very much for this very interesting discussion.
Thank you very much.